agree that they seem so much more than the sum of their parts, and I wanted to understand that. I remember being really obsessed by that by the time I was in 4th or 5th grade and starting to read about it a lot. So I was focused on science.
Are we correct in learning that your family had some labs that they were involved in?
That my family had somewhat, can you say it again?
Labs?
Well, my father was a biomedical scientist, and he worked in a laboratory much of the time, directed a lab. And when I was in my early teens, I wanted to work in that lab, and he let me come and work there. Learn a bit about biochemistry, about how to separate proteins. And I got a big start that way in science. Really, it was a huge advantage for me.
How much were your parents involved in your school when you were in the elementary school stage? Did they used to come by school all the time? How much were they involved?
I have to say not very often. Maybe it would have been once or twice a year. My parents were a little bit isolated, not very social creatures, and they didn't like PTA meetings, and they didn't participate too much in school activities. But at home, I have to say they emphasized the importance of doing well in school. And if I didn't do my homework, or if I got bad grades, which was almost never, they would be upset by it.
Now, when you were home working hard on your homework, you said you really like science. This is part of a program called STEM, which stands for, as you know, science, technology, engineering, and math. We are, impressing upon kids at this age that they need to start getting interested in it now to build a future for the country. What are your comments on that, and how much of that do you believe in?
I think that's very true, that people should start early in science. If they're interested in it, it's never really too early. And I do believe that our future depends enormously on science. And you just look around yourselves, look at the television monitor that you're looking at. Everything in our world has something to do with science and technology. And it's gotten to the point that most people are hardly aware of that, really don't understand much about how their world operates, which is sort of a shame. And it is a fact that fewer of the people who come to work with me are actually from the United States. Many of them are from China, from other parts of Asia. And I do worry about American science if young people don't begin to look forward to a career in science and try to be leaders.
What are some of the tips and things that kids can remember here to maybe pursue a career in science? What would you suggest they do at a younger age to prepare for a science career in the future?
Reading about great scientists of the past is always interesting. Anyone who likes history a little bit will like to read about science history and how we came to understand things the way they are. When I was young, I used to try to do experiments to the extent I could. I had a microscope at home. I would look at pond water. I would go out hiking and birding and keep lists of the birds I saw. And this wasn't really science, but it was a kind of preparation for it. And I think it's very enjoyable to do that. But here's the thing that all of you should remember about science. If you're a scientist, you're an explorer. You stand to see things that nobody has ever seen before. You stand to understand things that nobody ever understood before, or even think thoughts that no human being on Earth ever thought before. And there's something really exciting about that. We have been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Practically every point of land on Earth has been walked on by a person or seen by a person. But there are huge mysteries out there that we don't understand. Just how it is that cells live, exist, and do all the amazing things they do. Why it is that you can remember a phone number. How it is that you are able to think. These things are dark mysteries, and they won't be forever. But it will take dedicated people to try to understand how they work.
one small sidebar request, Dr. Beutler. If you could kindly move farther to your right, perhaps even to the chair that's at the head of the table.
I'm too much off.
That is perfect. That is perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So, couple of other questions, and then we'll open it up to the kids who are assembled here. Tell us about the Nobel Prize. Is there an ice cream sundae that comes with it? What is the Nobel Prize? What happened the day you were told you won it?
Oh, well, I was at home in San Diego in those days. I lived there. I was in my condominium. I was jet lagged because I had been traveling, and I got an email. And when the night, what do? You read your email. So I saw that this email had the subject line Nobel Prize. I thought that's pretty exciting. I think I'll open it up and see what it says. And it said that I had won the Nobel Prize. And I was in a state of amazement and disbelief. I always thought that might be possible, but I wasn't expecting it. I went downstairs and I Googled my name, and I found that it was really true. And at that time, suddenly I began getting phone calls from the press, from friends, and I began getting more emails at the rate of about one per second, and it kept on that way all day long. Wow. So it was a thrilling day, and it never really changed.
I want to kind of highlight something for the kids here. You said you always thought it would be possible. It seems like you had a certain sense of confidence and belief in your own work and your future. Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, let's put it differently. When I was a child, when I was a teenager, that would be sort of something that everyone in science has heard of. It was possible in the sense that I might be president one day. Anyone might win a Nobel Prize in a way, one might think, or one might hope to win it. As my career went on, and I did work that was quite well recognized, I received many invitations to speak, and it was clear that I was a successful scientist, then it became a realistic possibility. But so few people win a Nobel Prize that no one should ever really count on one. And no one should be in science just to win one, let's say. There are other very good reasons to be in science. Winning the Nobel Prize is a special gift that happens to very few people, and I felt just thrilled when it occurred.
Thank you for that. I mean, it just seems like having a dream and having the dream come true. The operative part is to aspire and have the dream, and that definitely seems to have been the case with you. Now, in another way, you experimented a lot in many different ways. Were these experiments, you would say, I think this is going to happen, and it would happen? Was it easy? Things went the way you expected, or you had setbacks? Tell us about that.
There were lots of setbacks, but let's think about what the experiment is. An experiment is an attempt to answer a question. One tries to set up the part of the world, what we call the system, and do so in such a way that something may happen or not happen, for example. And so usually you do this starting with a hypothesis. You guess that such and such might occur, and you test the hypothesis. And you should never be disappointed if it turns out the hypothesis was wrong. After all, you were only making a guess, and by rejecting the hypothesis, you often learn a great deal. In fact, the hypothesis is never something that you prove. I really get a little upset when people talk about how I proved the hypothesis. You never do that. You only fail to reject the hypothesis. And gradually doing that enough times, you build up an inferential picture of how you think something works. So experiments really only fail if you don't put things together properly to do the test. If the test is done and it gives an answer, that's a success. Now, it takes a long time to answer a major question in science, sometimes quite a few years. In my case, the one that led to the Nobel Prize took 5 years to answer. We were interested in knowing how our bodies detect infection when we have an infection with gram-negative bacteria. And to answer that question, we had to look for a gene, we had had to test many hypotheses, rule out that the gene was not on this chromosome or that chromosome, finally rule out that it was nowhere but in a tiny little interval of one chromosome, and then finally check all of the genes in that area until we found which gene was the one. So one is always doing that in science, and 1,000 times we were wrong about what the gene was, but we guessed what it was, and only once finally we were right.
That's a very, very good lesson for everybody. It's not that, you know, if you're wrong or right, or it's not about any of that. If you don't try one more time, you will never have the opportunity to be right. So being disappointed by something not going the way you guessed or not going the way you wanted doesn't really mean anything. It just means you should have the willpower to keep on it, and we're hearing it from somebody who did 1,000 of these, and that's wonderful. Final...
Maybe I can ask a question. Would that be all right, Padre?
Please go ahead.
Okay, is there a student there named Vikram Narasimha?
He's standing up. I'm not sure if you're able to see him standing up.
Okay, I see him now. How are you? Do you like science, Vikram?
Yes.
He says yes.
He says yes, very good. Let me ask, how many of you in the whole class like science, if I could have a show of hands? Wow, that's great. That's really great. I think it's all of you. Let's do it the other way. How many of you don't like science? Well, that's okay. Be open-minded about it. That's one of the most important things in science, is not to prejudge any situation. Just keep an open mind, and you might find that you do after a while. Almost everybody is curious about something, and that's the most important quality for being a scientist.
Well, thank you so much for your comments. We're going to start with 5th grade, and you know, I can't really pick a specific person, so bear with me. Go ahead, the person with that piece of paper in your hand. Kindly speak slowly and loudly, and I can repeat the question if Dr. Beutler cannot hear you. Go ahead.
How did science impact your life and will still impact your future?
How did science impact your life, and how will it still impact your future?
Oh, it's a very broad question and a very good one. I have to say that science is kind of the major thing in my life. The other thing would be my 3 sons. I have 3 children now in their 30s, and they were always a big part of my life. But science is a huge part of my life too. I go to work every day wondering if I'll see a new mutant mouse, for example, that tells us something about the immune system that no one has ever known before. It's a wonderful life. And I've felt this way since I was in my teens working in my father's lab. I expect I'll be doing science as long as my mind holds out and I'm bright enough to keep doing it.
If there is somebody who really loves science, does science for a living, and wants to do it all the time, and our country needs more people like him who are inspired by STEM subjects, and we're counting on you to be one of those. Next question, somebody from 4th grade. Anybody that has a written question, go ahead. What did you want to be when you were a kid?
Well, a scientist. I really wanted to be a scientist from really about as early as I can remember. If I had not gone into laboratory science, then I would have been some kind of a naturalist. That is to say, I'd be in forestry or in some situation where I could just enjoy the beauty of nature. But at some point, that wasn't enough for me, and I really wanted to understand nature. And I wanted to experiment and discover things. So it's hard for me to imagine a time when I didn't want to be a scientist. It really was from my earliest years.
We have a kid who is not in this school. His mom made him skip school from the other school, brought him here, and that's how much committed he is to science. Rohan, what question do you have? what was your favorite subject in school?
Always one of the sciences. There were two that I really enjoyed the most. Now I'm skipping to high school. Since you asked about school, I'm taking all of my schooling years. And high school was really exciting for me. Biology was exciting, and physics was really exciting. I found that physics was perhaps too challenging for me on the side of mathematics. I think to be a really cutting-edge physicist, you have to be absolutely top-notch in math. And I was good, but I thought perhaps not good enough to be world class. And biology was a bigger interest of mine anyway, for the reasons I mentioned. So I became a biologist.
Somebody from 3rd grade who has a written out question. Go ahead. Or go ahead. That's fine. Go ahead.
How old were you when you did your first experiment?
How old were you when you did your first experiment?
My first real serious experiment that I did in a laboratory, I would have been about 14 years old. And at that time I was working in my father's laboratory. And I worked with a technician who showed me how to measure the activity of enzymes in red blood cells. I remember using an instrument called a spectrophotometer, looking at how a certain enzyme catalyzed the production of a certain product, and plotting the dots of increasing optical density on a piece of graph paper, drawing a line, measuring the slope of the line, and understanding how well that enzyme was working. And after that, there were many, many other experiments, but that would have been about the first.
Now, you did say you had a microscope when you were younger. What kind of stuff would you do with the microscope, maybe in your 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, that age?
That's a good question. Now you remind me. There was a time in 5th grade that I got some water from a stream, and I put in some drops of egg yolk as nutrients, and then I sealed the bottle for a time. And sure enough, it grew all kinds of microbes, some protozoa, some bacteria, and I spent quite a lot of time just looking at them in some amazement to see what had grown out of apparently nothing before.
So how many of you, I'm asking the kids here, have a microscope at home? There are about 2-3 dozen kids. Let's just make sure we understand the simple experiment Dr. Beutler said. Grab a bottle of water, throw some of the yellow of the egg, make sure you seal the bottle or your moms or dads will get upset at us, and then leave it alone and look in a microscope with it and see what happens to the water. There is a very, very interesting experiment. Somebody from a different section on 5th grade, not from the same section, go ahead, the gentleman in green.
What is your favorite experiment?
What was your favorite experiment? And we'll kind of block it to an earlier period of time. When you were much younger, what was one of your favorite experiments?
That would have been one of my favorites. I'll tell you one that was not one of my favorites. My brother also, older brother, was a little bit interested in science, and he wanted to look at a blood film on a microscope slide. So who should he pick as the source of the blood but his younger brother? And he decided to give me a rusty pocket knife to cut my finger and give him a small specimen of blood. And I was reluctant to do this, of course, because I wasn't stupid. But he was so ashamed that I was unwilling to donate blood to this experiment that I did cut my finger, and it really hurt.
So those,
So I advise you not to do that at home.
those of you with microscopes and a sibling, do not follow that part. Somebody from 4th grade, not from the section where that kid asked the earlier question, the one in bright pink. Oh, I guess. No. Which diseases did you focus your research on specific to detection and cure?
I focused on a problem called gram-negative septic shock. If you get a very serious infection with gram-negative bacteria, which would include maybe about half of all the bacteria there are in the world. Then something terrible can happen. Your blood pressure can fall, your blood only, eventually you don't perfuse your vital organs with enough blood, and there begins to be a lot of cell death. So it's a very serious medical problem. Probably about 1,000 people die every single day of that problem somewhere in the world. So it was an important medical issue, and everyone knew that the disease was caused by a molecule called endotoxin, which is a structural molecule of gram-negative bacteria. But no one knew the receptor for endotoxin, and I tracked that down. And once I started looking for it, I felt I just couldn't let go of the problem.
The last few words Dr. Beutler said is very important. He used his scientific mind to identify a problem that would lead to a lot of good. And you heard him say once he started, he did not give up until he got to the answer. And that is a great lesson we can all take, and make sure that you don't give up too early. Many times you give up too early, and that's a shame. Somebody from 3rd grade, not in the same section as somebody was asked a question, go ahead. He may have answered that question. That indeed was one of his most favorites. Did you take science seriously?
Oh, very seriously. I felt it was something very real for me, not something abstract. I could see a lot of questions in the world that were in need of answering, and I wanted to be a part of that. And that was the reason I tried to go through school so rapidly as well. I finished school very early because somehow I wanted to stop learning about science only and to be a practitioner of science, to really be a part of the whole process. And the sooner I could do that, then I felt the happier I would be.
Back to, I think we were in 5th grade, or we were in 3rd. We'll go back to 5th. Somebody, and we have about time for 3 or 4 more questions. And Dr. Beutler, thank you for being so generous with your time. 5th grade, a section that has not yet asked a question. There you go, you're on the left. Go ahead, stand up. Her. Go ahead. Loud. What is the earliest age you can remember that you really took an interest in science?
Probably about 7 or so, 6 or 7. I remember having a conversation with my father about dolphins for some reason, how intelligent they were, and how it happened that they got to be that way. And we talked often about evolution as well when I was at that age. And I found that just remarkable that all life had a common origin, and even the trees outside were our distant relatives, which they certainly are. And I think that all came to crystallize for me about at that age, 6 or 7. So it's never too early. As soon as you become aware of life and how amazing it is, then naturally you start to ask questions about it.
So Dr. Beutler just said trees are our relatives. How many of you here knew that already? Good. When you walk out the door, say hi to the nearest tree. They are related to you. All right, somebody... Distant cousin. Somebody from 4th grade, a section that has not asked a question so far. Go ahead. Okay, those are 2 questions. That's okay.
Did you succeed or fail your first experiment?
Louder.
Did you succeed or fail your first experiment?
How successful was your first experiment? Did you succeed or fail in it?
As I remember, those early experiments that I did were aimed at looking to see whether there was variation in these enzymes in red cells. The enzyme, by the way, was called glutathione peroxidase. And we did find that there was variation. And so in that sense, it was a success. It may have taken a week or 2 to get everything to really work right, but it was a success.
Thank you. 3rd grade, a section that hasn't asked a question. Go ahead.
Are you still sure that there are other science discoveries to be found?
are you still sure that there are other science discoveries that are yet to be made?
I am absolutely sure of that. You know, I was talking to someone the other day about an administrator of the Patent Office in the United States. Sometime maybe about 100 years ago, he was interviewed and he said that he expected to be closing the Patent Office within a few years because most of the inventions that had ever been made, that would ever be made, had been made already. And of course we view that as a very foolish kind of attitude, considering all the inventions that there were in the last 100 years. And I think the same is true about discoveries. There are things that we can hardly dream of that will be discovered within the next few years. Within every decade of my life, I'm just amazed at what is discovered. When I began in science, we couldn't even sequence DNA. It was impossible to do. And we couldn't clone it. We couldn't clone animals, certainly. And the fact that we're able to do all of the things that are done every day in my laboratory, I would have laughed at it 40 years ago and said, that'll never be possible. So never underestimate what is there to be discovered. You're going to see some amazing things in your life if you pay attention.
All right. One last question and we'll conclude at that. We're coming up towards the time that we said we're going to be done. Go ahead. You.
Was it cool when you saw inside a mouse?
So when you first saw inside a mouse, was it cool?
Was it cool? It was. It really was. It was like looking in a way of a little biological machine. And I thought at the time how amazing that all of these organs work together and are coordinated in such a way that they keep the mouse alive and running around. And I thought that was something I wanted to understand. That's why I went to medical school, you might say. Understand how a whole organism works.
All right, Dr. Beutler, you've been very generous with your time. Any concluding words before we thank you a lot for your involvement today in inspiring 300-odd kids here? That's the signal that it's the last question.
Yeah.
We'll try one time and then we'll be done after this.
Why are you all waving?
All right, so sorry about that. I think we literally were asking you for your final words before we say thank you for your time.
Final words were I'm inspired by all of you because I see here's a class of young people who are really excited about science. Looks like there must be more than 100 of you there, and that's something that really warms my heart. So I've enjoyed talking to all of you. I hope you all will be great successes in science.
What are we going to say to Dr. Beutler?